Welcome to this week's episode of Ffrf's Ask an Atheist. I'm Andrew Seidel, a constitutional attorney here at the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and its Director of Strategic Response.
And I'm Patrick Elliott, Ffrf's Senior Counsel. We're here today to talk about why we should sweat the small stuff. Sometimes Ffrf will get asked, why would you go after a police vehicle that has a religious decal? Why would we go after small violations of the Constitution? Well, Andrew has an answer for us. He's going to be presenting, or we're going to watch his presentation from Ffrf's 2013 convention about why we should sweat the small stuff, why we should pursue even small violations of the Constitution. If you have questions after the presentation, you can submit those and we will review those, and we'll be back to take your questions.
Yeah, so Patrick and I are going to stick around until after the presentation. We'll be here to answer any questions you might have, so feel free to ask them below. And let's go ahead and roll the tape.
In January of this year, we got a complaint from a family in a small rural town down south, a mom named Christine, with 3 children in the school district. And the school district wasn't really obeying the separation of state and church. It started off kind of small. Her youngest son was asked to write, as part of his education, a story about Christmas. And he had to use the word Christ in Christmas. Okay? He spelled it Xmas. And the teacher pulled him up to the front of the room and said, "Why are you Xing our Lord and Savior out of his own birthday?" Young kid, first, second grade, ridiculing him in front of the class. Not the biggest deal. Her older son was told that he had to copy lines from the Christian Bible as an assignment. Christine complained. She successfully complained to the teacher, and the teacher actually changed the assignment. Instead of copying lines out of the Bible, her son had to copy lines out of Dante's Inferno. This way, he knows what awaits people like him. That's what the teacher said to a 5th grader. From there, it got a little worse. Her youngest daughter had her head slammed into a concrete wall. She was told by her fellow student that she should be burned alive because she was a witch for not believing in Jesus. Her youngest son was then surrounded on the playground by 4 other students. This is 2nd grade, who told him that they were going to cut off each of his fingers and toes in succession, gouge out his eyes, and then hang him until he admitted that Jesus Christ was his Lord and Savior. 2nd grade. Okay? The school took no action whatsoever. Christine complained. They didn't do anything. She complained to the sheriff. The sheriff didn't do anything, told them to go back to the school resource officer, which is kind of a police officer in school. They didn't do anything, so she got in touch with us. I was beyond angry. I wrote a very, very strong letter, and the superintendent all of a sudden jumped to it. Went around to every single classroom, spoke to each teacher in front of the class, explained that no type of religious instruction could occur, and why religious bullying was beyond the pale. So it was a nice victory that we had very quick, and I've been in touch with that parent, Christine, since a few times. Nothing has happened since then. It was a good victory for us. And this was back in January. And there was actually something else going on in January. And I'm going to touch on this story again in a little bit. But something else going on in January that was a little bit bigger. Hang on here, we're having technical difficulties. And I had a little debate with Bill O'Reilly about this. And I wasn't going to show any of this clip at all. I was just going to touch on it. But Patrick and Liz showed the clip of Bill talking about the Wisconsin atheists going to hell. And you know he's a hypocrite, right? But we can actually see him being a hypocrite right here. So I thought I would just go ahead and show
My question, and I'll give you the last word, is you are in the minority. The folks want the ceremony to include the Bible. Does that matter at all to you?
The Bill of Rights exists to protect the minority from the tyranny of the majority. We are a nation of laws, and neither our laws nor our morality are founded upon the Bible. Religion gets its morality from us, not the other way around. The Bible...
All right, so you think using the Bible is
exhibits a Bronze Age morality. Excuse me?
You think using the Bible in the inauguration ceremony is tyranny?
I think that the Bible exhibits a Bronze Age morality that treats women as chattel, human beings as property, and punishes innocent children for the crimes of their parents to the third and fourth generation. And that's just the first set of 10 Commandments.
Okay, Mr. Seidel, when you get to heaven, you can debate George Washington about why he wanted God in his inaugural address, and Dr. Martin Luther King about the Bible. And I'm going to love to see that debate.
So I'm going to heaven, an atheist in Wisconsin. So I just thought I would point that out. Bill and I were debating the inauguration and the use of religion in the inauguration. The president swears on the Bible and says at the end of his oath, "So help me God." We wrote a letter to President Obama asking him to leave out the Bible and to leave out the "so help me God" verbiage. And then we asked others, concerned citizens like yourselves in the movement, to write to the president as well and ask him to do the same thing. Obama did not follow our advice. Not terribly surprising. I was a little bit more surprised by the response from some of the people in our movement. They said things like, "It's not a big deal," or "It's not worth my time," or "Is this really important?" Okay? Basically, they were saying that this is too small to worry about. Okay? And I found this disheartening. The Constitution lays out the oath very, very clearly. Here it is. It ends, "To the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States," period. There is no "so help me God." So in the very process of swearing to uphold this document, the President and the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court are rewriting it. I find this to be a very big deal. So the "so help me God" addition is a violation of the Constitution. But it's a little bit more than a violation. It's also symbolic. It's a symbol to all religious citizens that a co-religionist is in that office looking out for them. But more importantly, it's a symbol of the disrespect that this country has shown for the separation of state and church. This little violation is a step over the line. It's a crack in Jefferson's wall through which other violations will certainly follow. And what I hope to convince you of today, or at least get you thinking about today, is that every violation of the wall of separation, no matter how small, is worth challenging. So, small violations. In God we trust on our money and our government buildings. One nation under God in the pledge. We have crosses on public lands, nativities on public lands, and then one of our least favorites, government prayer. Each of these is a violation that needs to be challenged by our movement loudly, immediately, and constantly. That's what we do at FFRF every day. Not necessarily challenged in court, but challenged nonetheless. In short, we must sweat the small stuff. Okay? And it may be that we need to worry about the small stuff most of all. So that's my hypothesis today. And James Madison, the man who is largely responsible for the First Amendment, the whole Bill of Rights, and the Constitution, happens to agree with me. He said that there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachments of those in power than by sudden and violent usurpations. Okay? So it's not the sudden imposition of a theocracy that we really need to worry about. It's the death by 1,000 cuts. It's the incessant erosion of Jefferson's wall, the creeping normalcy of government policy that's dictated from the pulpit. That's what we need to be worried about. The oath, the pledge, the coins, the nativity scene on public land, the cross on public land, the National Day of Prayer, government prayer. These things are important for two reasons. First, because they are used to justify other, more serious violations. And second, because they are symbolic, as I've hinted at. Okay? And I need to do a brief detour here into vocabulary so that I cannot be taken out of context later. When I say small stuff, I just want to be clear. I don't think there are small violations. Separation means separation, not something less. Jefferson's wall, in describing the relation between state and church, is a wall, not a line. Okay? So I don't think there are small violations. So whenever I say the word small, air quotes around it, okay? All right. Just for Bill O'Reilly later on when he tries to take me out of context. Okay. So the first problem with these violations is that they are used to justify other violations. How many of you have been in an argument about the Christian nation, that we're a Christian nation? Show of hands. Okay, and how many of you have heard your opponents use one nation under God or in God we trust to prove their point. Yeah, fairly uniform. I do this for a living. Every time I get in an argument, almost without fail, these two phrases come up. Okay? And I think there's actually a scientific theory that may well apply to this situation. It's called broken windows theory. Anybody ever heard of it? A few people. Okay, so broken windows theory was first postulated in 1982 by Wilson and Kelling. It gained some popularity in the book The Tipping Point. Anybody ever heard of that? And Freakonomics. And essentially what broken windows theory hypothesizes is that the perception of disorder, you perceiving disorder, will lead to more disorder. So to take the broken windows example, if you were to see, or if somebody were to break a window in a building, okay, and that window does not get fixed, other people see that, and it kind of is a symbol to them that, oh, nobody really cares about this. And another window gets broken, and then another. So seeing that first broken window leads to more broken windows. And those broken windows eventually lead to graffiti, maybe some more property crime, and then eventually violent crime. So that's what broken windows hypothesize. And there's kind of two things to take away from it. When nobody cares about the little things, it leads to bigger things. And that petty crime is not only contagious, but it can actually make more egregious crimes happen. Okay? So stick with me and I'll prove it to you. A lot of people attribute New York City's steep drop in crime rate to the application of broken windows theory. I don't agree necessarily, but I do put a lot of stock in scientific experiments. And there was a set of 6 experiments done in the Netherlands by Kieser, Lindenberg, and Steg. And they published their findings December 12, 2008 in the Journal of Science in an article called The Spreading of Disorder. And what they did is they wanted to test broken windows theory. So they devised this series of experiments, and they had a control experiment, and then they had their actual experiment. And this is an example. You can see it right here. So this is the control, and this is the experiment. It's an alley with a bunch of bikes parked in. Everybody in the Netherlands, bikes everywhere. It's like cars. And what they did was they put these little flyers on the bikes. The experimenters did. And what they are testing is the graffiti. So if you look in this one, you can see there's no graffiti on the walls, lots of graffiti here. And this sign with graffiti with a red circle around it, that means you can't do graffiti here. Right? They would know that, even though we wouldn't. Okay? So in the first one, you can't do graffiti here, and there is no graffiti. In this one, you can't do graffiti here, and there is graffiti. So this is palpable evidence that somebody has violated the rule. Okay? This is the perception of disorder. Okay? So they wanted to test, are people going to be more likely to litter where they've seen that people are already willing to break this rule? So in the alley example where there was no graffiti, 33% of the people that came back to their bikes littered the flyer, which kind of seems like a lot. But when people had broken the graffiti rule, 69% of the people that came back to their bikes littered. More than double. If you are a p-value person, that's a highly significant p-value, 0.001 less than. Okay? Another set of experiments they did. This is the red box here is a public mailbox, like our blue mailboxes. And this is an envelope that was put into the mailbox by the experimenters, but they didn't put it all the way in. On the envelope, there is one of those windows so that you can see the address label. And in that window is money, a €5 note. So they wanted to test whether or not people walking by would steal that money. And they had 3 different experiments here. They had a mailbox with no graffiti and no litter around it. Okay? And then they had a mailbox with a lot of graffiti but no litter. And then they had a mailbox with no litter and a lot of graffiti. So with no litter and no graffiti, 13% of the people walking by stole the money. Okay? With litter but no graffiti, 27% of the people stole the money. So again, about double. And then with graffiti and no litter, 25% stole. So again, double. So the perception of disorder led to more disorder. And remember the story I told you earlier about Christine and her children. Okay? Things started off small. You know, it was just an assignment using the word Christ. And then a teacher ridiculing a child for not doing it. And then it was copying lines and telling a kid that they were going to be going to hell. And then it was actual threats of and physical violence towards children. So things started off small and they escalated quickly. And violating the Constitution is a crime. You don't go to jail for it, but when the government exercises a power it does not have, so when the government exercises a religious power, for instance, in the Federalist number 69, Alexander Hamilton wrote that the executive has no particle of spiritual jurisdiction. So when they institute a national day of prayer, or when they say a prayer before the legislative session, they're exercising a power that they were not given. Okay? That we, the people, did not give them that power. So that's a violation of the law. Now, so the criminology context is very like the constitutional one. But you can see these broken windows very easily in our legal system. So we work on a common law system. So when court is going to decide a case, they look at older cases that were already decided by the court. Okay? And you can look back at the cases that were decided by the Supreme Court and the lower courts, and you can see these broken windows. More and more broken windows happening. So if we were to look at Elk Grove versus Newdow, which was a 2004 case, we'll go backwards through time. This essentially upheld the under God language in the pledge by booting the case on standing grounds. Justice O'Connor issued a very strange concurrence, and she said that there are no de minimis violations of the Constitution, no constitutional harms so slight that courts are obliged to ignore them, except in God we trust, or God save the United States and this honorable court, and things like that. So essentially she's saying these things are not really a constitutional violation, despite what I just said in the previous sentence. In Allegheny versus ACLU, which is 1989, the court actually struck down a nativity scene, but the dissent argued against striking down the nativity scene because of the National Day of Prayer, because courts opened their session with God save the United States and this honorable court, because of congressional chaplains, in God we trust, and because of legislative prayer. In Lynch versus Donnelly, which was 1984, when they actually struck down, or excuse me, they upheld a nativity scene, the court used in God we trust, and one nation under God, and congressional chaplains as support. Marsh versus Chambers, 1983, which upheld legislative prayer. They looked at it and they said, whenever we open the court, we say, God save the United States and this honorable court. So they're building this jurisprudential house of cards, going back to 1952, which was Zorak versus Clausen, which upheld religious release time classes so long as they were off campus. That case used prayers in our legislative halls. It used presidential appeals to the Almighty, so help me God in the courtroom oath, and then Justice Douglas ended with one of my least favorite quotes in all of Supreme Court history. A fastidious atheist or agnostic could even object to the supplication with which the court opens each session. God save the United States in this honorable court. You're damn right. We should be objecting. We should be objecting to this. We can bring down their whole house of cards by attacking these small violations. Okay? Because the bottom line is that these small violations do lead to larger violations. If we can get the smaller ones, we can get the larger ones too. Okay? So whether or not broken windows theory is valid in the criminal context, it certainly looks valid in the Establishment Clause context. I mean, you can see it laid out in our cases. So that was the first one, justifying other violations. But the reason that courts use these small violations to justify other larger violations is because these small violations signal a certain willingness on the part of our society to tolerate the violations of the separation of state and church. So just as that first broken window symbolizes that to all the other window breakers out there that it's okay to do this, those first one nation under God, in God we trust, they symbolize that all the other violations are okay. And this is the reason that it's important for us to challenge them. They're symbolic. And I think we atheists tend to ignore the power of symbols. We've thrown off dogma. We focus a lot on the ideas that are underlying symbols as opposed to the symbols themselves. But I think that can come at a heavy cost. Religion does not ignore the power of symbols. The coexist bumper sticker, everybody's seen this, right? Right? This only makes sense because of religious symbols. Think of what Christianity would be without its symbols. Okay? Does everybody remember Lenny Bruce's joke that if Jesus had been executed 20 years ago, Catholic school children would be running around with electric chairs hanging around their neck? Yeah. So symbols are so important to religions that Christianity actually stole a lot of the symbols of the groups of people that it was trying to assimilate. So the Christmas tree, right? They stole the symbol of undying life in the darkest winter. They stole kind of a lot. But they also stole the celebration of the winter solstice, and they renamed it Christmas. They stole the celebration of spring, which is rebirth, celebration of life, hence the eggs at Easter. What do eggs have to do with Jesus? Rabbits, fertility symbol, and rabbits' legendary procreative abilities. What do they have to do with Jesus? Right? Easter itself is the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the vernal equinox. Sounds awfully pagan to me. Right? They took over these symbols because they were trying to convert the people who had already adhered to those symbols. So symbols are powerful. Governments understand the power of symbols. Flags, uniforms, the imposing edifices at every state and federal capital that you see, all symbols of government power. Companies have turned symbols into a science. It's called branding. They have whole divisions of their companies that are devoted to it. And then successful movements also understand the power of symbols. Symbols can communicate in an instant what it would take a whole book to communicate. They represent not just an idea, but an entire identity. And not all atheists have failed to understand the importance of symbols. Richard Dawkins, Scarlet A, got one right here, understands the importance of symbols and thinks that we need to be adopting them, and I tend to agree. Greta Christina, a really wonderful writer, wrote an article about a lot of these same small violations that I'm talking about, and she asked the question, are these the most pressing problems facing the nation? No, of course not, she answered. They're not even the most pressing problems facing the atheist movement, but that doesn't make them trivial. Symbolic issues can have a significant impact. Segregated drinking fountains and lunch counters weren't the most pressing problems facing the civil rights movement, but they were important nonetheless. Okay? And as I've said repeatedly, these small violations symbolize the disrespect for the separation of state and church in this country. But there's another more insidious purpose that they serve. They tell all of you, every non-Christian out there, that we are merely tolerated. We are not members of the favored majority. We are, again, simply tolerated. Thomas Paine said of tolerance and intolerance that both were despotisms, that the one assumes itself the right of withholding the liberty of conscience and the other of granting it. So symbols may not have much power for us as non-believers, but they communicate a privileged status to believers. And I owe this little bit to Dan Barker, but these broken windows are the religious staking their claim on their territory. They are like a dog in a new neighborhood full of fire hydrants, marking their territory. This is mine. This is my government. Okay? They're putting up their symbols to show that this belongs to them. And we have to challenge them. That's all there is to it. And I want to be clear about what I mean when I say that we have to challenge them. I'm not talking only about lawsuits and legal challenges, although that certainly is an important part of what we do. I'm talking about getting active in our government. I'm talking about calling your state and local representatives, calling your congresspeople. I'm talking about running for office. We need more atheists in office. You're brilliant people, get out there. I'm talking about going to public meetings, getting involved at your local school board. Patrick and Liz showed you those videos, and if you've ever seen a school board meeting that is not centered around religion, there's 4 or 5 people there. Get there and get involved. And finally, I'm talking about coming out of the closet. I'm talking about winning this fight with demographics, normalizing non-belief. This is one of the reasons the LGBT movement was so successful. Everybody knows somebody who it turns out is gay, and they're no different. Well, they may be a little more wonderful, actually. Everybody knows somebody who's an atheist, and they're probably a little more wonderful too. So you've got to come out of the closet to your friends, family, at work if you can do so successfully without losing your job. Obviously, you need to do it safely, but highly recommend that everybody does it. It is one of the most important ways that we are going to win this fight. And a fun way to do it is to go onto our website. If you haven't seen these, this is our Out campaign. It's been going on for a while. You can make these little virtual billboards, and they go right up on your Facebook. Mine says, "Sorry, Jesus, you died for nothing. I take personal responsibility for my mistakes." Annie Laurie took a little bit of a higher road, give me human rights over religious rights. Dan, I just lost faith in faith. This is one easy way that you can do this. Other ways, if you're not, how many of you are not FFRF members? That's right, I'm gonna make you raise your hand if you're not a member. Okay, if you're not an FFRF member, yeah, nobody wants to raise their hand. Okay. You should be an FFRF member. If you are a member, you should give us more money because we really need to get a building built. Some of you, Todd, if you want to talk to Todd as a volunteer at our office, he can vouch for the state of my office. I'm in a small corner of the conference room. We are getting a new expansion, and we really need all the help we can get. I would love to have an office proper. Patrick shares his office with interns. Liz is in a corner of the library. She shares her office with interns. Oh, I see another one of our interns. Maddie, raise your hand and wave. Everybody turn around and say hi to Maddie. Maddie wasn't here earlier. Give her a hand. Maddie has been with us for a long time now. Absolutely prolific, really wonderful intern. We can't do this alone. You know, we got 2,500 complaints last year. We wrote over 1,000 letters. You heard Liz say more than 1,700 complaints so far this year. We have 4 attorneys. We have really, really wonderful interns who help us a lot and make us look really, really good. But the math just doesn't work. We need every citizen to be helping. There are 60 million non-religious Americans in this country. Okay? And we need 60 million Zach Coplans and Jessica Alquists and Ellery Shems. Okay? We need you to stand up as well. I'm going to end with this, one of my favorite quotes. If there is no struggle, there is no progress. Power concedes nothing without a demand. Find out just what a people will submit to, and you have found out the exact amount of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. This is not the atheist duckling speaking. This is Frederick Douglass. It's up to us. And really what it boils down to is it's up to you. You actually don't have to be an Ellery Shemp or a McCollum or a Zach Copland or a Jessica Alquist, but you do have a voice, and you have to use it. Thank you.
So we actually need to update that talk a little bit because Patrick and I right now are sitting in the new addition to Free Thought Hall. We don't have 4 attorneys. We have 9 attorneys on staff now. Our membership is up to almost 30,000, so times have changed. Bing is no longer
right.
And so we do have some questions coming in that we want to go ahead and take. And I'm going to take first from Tessa McKenna, who asks, I often see fellow atheists on this page saying FFRF is being petty on this or that case, and then it makes all atheists look collectively bad. What would you say to those people? So for me, I think kind of 2 things. One, that Frederick Douglass quote at the end is one of my favorites, and it is, power concedes nothing without a demand. You know, if we're not demanding something of government, we're not going to get anything. And we are fighting for a principle. We're fighting for a secular government, for the principle that state and church should be separate. And if we don't stand on that principle, then we kind of don't stand for anything.
Right. I mean, this is a complaint that bothers me sometimes because we even have what I would consider very difficult violations in public schools where people are being coerced into prayer. And that same argument is made, oh, well, I'm an atheist and it doesn't bother me, or I can avoid this. And so I think it's an attack sometimes from people who may agree with us on many things, but I think it's off base that something doesn't bother you doesn't mean everybody else has to give up protecting their constitutional rights, or many of the issues we deal with young people. So especially in the school context, to just disclaim it as not being important because somebody thinks, oh, there's bigger fish to fry. It's like, I agree there's bigger fish to fry, let's fry those, but why don't we deal with these ones as well?
Yeah, I think that's excellent. And maybe it would help for people to put themselves in the position of the person being more affected by those particular violations, as a person being in that community or having that kid in that public school whose teacher's telling them to pray and things like that. But it can be very, very difficult. So we actually got a question online that's a little bit on topic that we're going to touch on. Let's go ahead and show that one. This is about churches and whether or not churches are able to hire police, off-duty police, who can use their uniform to direct traffic and show up on Sunday mornings and help the churchgoers in and out of the parking lot, things like that. Do you want to go ahead and take that one?
Sure. I mean, as far as I'm aware, I don't know that any court has ever addressed this particular issue. Generally, what I would want to be most interested in, and this person could do it, is request the police department's policies. Because sometimes officers make extra money by working private events, and there's an approval process for that. But just because there's traffic control and an officer, that may not necessarily be a violation. I would be concerned, though, what is the department's policies? How is that handled? Is the church getting some preferential treatment? Then I think it would be a problem.
Yeah, there certainly can be problems. We see this with churches renting schools right now. Technically, the law says that churches can rent schools, but we often see them not paying to rent schools, and they're only supposed to be doing it on a fair market basis. So that's one of the things that we certainly watch out for. It's kind of a similar issue. We'd probably prefer it not happen, but it may not be illegal. So we have another question from Tabby Martina that touches on the story I told at the beginning. And she says, how do I speak to my child about religious bullying? She's 9. We are raising her to believe in facts and science. We want her to be respectful of everyone, but I'm tired of her coming home from school with flyers from churches, from her friends. They tell her that she is going to burn in hell for not believing. Can you help me help her?
Well, I mean, there's kind of two issues here. One is, if there is bullying going on at school, I don't think you should just talk to your child. I think you should talk to the teacher or talk to the principal. We've had situations where at some point parents have to leave a school system because the bullying has gotten so rampant, and in part it could have been dealt with earlier had they informed the teacher about it, had they informed the school about it. And I don't think many people know, but schools have an obligation to put a stop to it. There are cases where there's been bullying on the basis of race, religion, or sex, and the school districts have been held liable for that, even though it was obviously students doing it. So at this age, certainly I think talk to your child about how she should react, what they're doing, is wrong, but then also address it with the school as well, if possible.
I think that's really important too, also to lay the groundwork for fixing it. But in addition, if you don't address it with the school, there might not be a way to deal with it later on. And like we saw with Christine, and like I'm actually dealing with a case like this week, it gets worse and worse. And we have had people leave school districts. It actually kind of happens a lot. And if you're not going to the administration and trying to get them to help fix it, it's going to be much harder to deal with later on down the road when things get worse. So it's important to kind of nip in the bud. And we should say a note on the church flyers too. That could be a problem. That could be a state church violation, depending on the school's policy. That's something we could look at. And as always, if anybody ever has anything that they think might be a violation of state church, especially if it's going on in a public school, please go to ffrf.org and report that under the legal tab. There is a state church reporting form. We keep all your information confidential, and we'll step in and deal with the school for you instead of you having to do it, if that's something you're interested in. So we have another question that is actually about Hurricane Harvey that I thought we should touch on, and it's wondering what FFRF is doing. And many people don't realize that FFRF actually has a charity arm. It's called Non-Belief Relief. And FFRF's charity arm, Non-Belief Relief, has donated $10,000 to Hurricane Harvey Relief Fund, which is managed by Houston's mayor, or is being, administered by the Greater Houston Community Foundation. So Non-Belief Relief has given $10,000 to that, and we're looking for other ways to help. We're actually doing a drive here in the office to get some supplies together that we're going to send down as well. So it's a terrible thing that's happened.
Right. I mean, it may be a good time to touch on why. Obviously, as atheists and just humans, we recognize helping other people. But part of why I think non-belief relief is interesting, or there's a Foundation Beyond Belief, other groups, it shows that we are out there doing good. There is an added benefit of portraying to the community, we care about our community. Obviously, there are many churches in Texas that are doing good by helping, and hey, we're also would like to contribute and do so as a group.
And some churches had to be shamed into helping. Joel Osteen, we're looking at you. But I think you're absolutely right. There is a stigma attached to being an atheist, and it's been documented in studies that people believe we are unkind and ungenerous, and I think this absolutely proves that that's not the case. So we don't actually have any other questions right now, so we're going to go ahead and call it a day. But you can join us next week for FFRF's Ask an Atheist, same time, same Facebook channel, right here at noon Central Time on Wednesdays. See you then.